So Dad was a baseball scout. I forget when he started, sometime in the 60s or whatever. So he had, his scouting territory was southern half of Mississippi, I think, and then Louisiana, and then like the eastern half of Texas. Plus he had Dominican Republic, Nassau, and Venezuela. But I went traveling with him to the south, and it was kind of interesting because here I am as a kid, and I would go on trips with him most of the summer because I wasn't working or anything during the summer. And I would get in conversations with my classmates, and they would say things like, oh yeah, well, we're gonna go, you know, for our 2-week vacation, we're gonna go to someplace or whatever. And I remember when I would hear that, I was like, that's so weird. I just travel all summer. I mean, it didn't make, I was like, oh, you only get like 2 weeks. Yeah, just, and I thought how fortunate I was to be able to do that, but it was normal. And I go traveling also with my siblings. You know, we'd go travel in the car, and we'd go, and we're not going to like really great places or anything. We're going to small towns, sometimes larger towns, and we're staying just like at normal hotels. I remember the La Quinta was, one we would stay at. And we did, and Dad loved knowing places to eat that were local places where he knew the people. And you got an inexpensive meal, but a good one, you know, and there were decent people there. He excelled at that. And the other scouts were like that too, that he was with. You know, oh yeah, well I know about this place. Oh, oh yeah, I know that place, you know. It was really cool. So those are my summers. I got to, you know, go to these hotels, swim in the swimming pool. You know, my eyes are all red from the chlorine and stuff like that, and then watch TV on the hotel bed or whatever. I just having the life. I mean, I lived so much life by the time I was like 12 years old. It was just fantastic. So that was really great. But the other thing I think about, and I've talked to people about, when I would tell them about, okay, well, you know, I'd go with Dad scouting. First of all, you know, it's like, what is a scout? You know, they go look at ball players, usually at, not at high school level, usually at junior college level and college level, mostly junior colleges. So you're going to all these small towns that have junior colleges. Junior colleges are pretty neat because it's a 2-year program, and with junior college, they're always looking at it as, this is a stepping stone to the pros, right? Or to college. The coach is not trying to hang on to you for 2 years. They know that you may probably just be there for a year or whatever. So they're player oriented. They want the player to do really well so they can go on to the next level. They're not trying to build a big program, right? I mean, they may have really successful programs and they may try and get other people, but they're not trying to keep you at that level. Kind of interesting. So we go around to all these little small towns, whatever. We go to the ballpark, and let's say the game starts at 7 o'clock, all right, 7 p.m. Well, we get there at like 4:30 because we'd watch batting practice and fielding and see how they do. So, and I liked it. I mean, I guess I learned how to entertain. I didn't hit the mic down. I learned how to entertain myself pretty early in life, whatever. And I like doing that. I kind of like the feel of it. You know, you're hearing these bats, they roll that cage out. It's usually some assistant coach that's pitching the ball there. You know, I could never pitch that many strikes like that, you know, and this guy's just pitching strikes at, you know, like 70 miles an hour or whatever. And they're getting their eye for the game. And they do that for every game. All right. Roll up that thing, hit that ball. I love the sound of it. And then you have guys fielding out there too. At the same time, this guy's got a fungo, which is like a really thin bat, and you hit infield to these guys. And that's an art form right there. So they're practicing, you know, how they do the double play, how they throw the ball over to first, stuff like that. And they do that for every game. And you'd watch that. And so Dad would watch this. He usually went to these games knowing who he wanted to look at, or sometimes just like, okay, I want to just see how these guys are doing. I've maybe heard about this. Because there was always this, with the scouts, they were always talking with each other about, you know, who is good and who is not, and stuff like that. They didn't really withhold information like, oh, I'm going to keep this guy secret, right? They were pretty free with their information. So watch batting practice, watch fielding, watch the guys line the field, right? Wet it down a little bit. Stay there, watch maybe up to 3 innings because he wanted to see how the guy did at bat and in the field, and then we go. Usually over to that local restaurant that he liked, like at 8 o'clock or something like that. They're still open. It was a great life. Every once in a while we'd stay for a whole game. Now what Dad would do, his other thing that he would do while he was there is, and this really made me realize how much he was respected, and that is he would go down and talk to the coach of the team. All right, so you go down there, you go down to the dugout or whatever. Here comes the guy, to come talk to him and stuff like that. And those coaches were always like standing at attention when they talked to Dad. Because they were like, this guy is the real deal. He played in the major leagues. This isn't some scout that's come along that read about it, and played up to a certain level or whatever. He's the real deal, and he played there for a while. And they knew about him. And plus Dad kind of had that air about him too, where he'd get respect, but he was very easy to talk to. But I always remember that. It's like, man, they really respect my dad. It was pretty cool. The other thing too is, and then every once in a while he would talk to the player, either before the game. That would probably be like somebody that he knew probably for a while. Or if we stayed for the whole game, then after the game, and he would talk to him. And it would just be a man-to-man conversation, like, because I had one of these with like Tony John. It's like, well, you needed to, you're okay, you need to develop these particular aspects of your game and stuff like that, and we'll look at you again or something. Nothing big, nothing like, hey, I don't want you to do anything, go home, you'll be expecting a call from the lottery, right? None of that. It was always that kind of low-key type of stuff. It's kind of like when it used to be this way. I don't think it's so much now, but it used to be when you look in a dugout, especially in the major leagues, and they show a shot of it during a game, unless a guy hit a home run or something like that, you would not be able to tell if they were winning or losing. It was always like, well, because you know what they're thinking. We're 5 runs up, but we could go down 6, we could lose by a run, right? Or we're down a few runs and maybe things could happen, but we need this guy to produce, right? I mean, it's just all like that. They're just kind of even about it. So, Dad was like that. It was really interesting. The other thing that we did, which was fun, was when we'd stay at some of these hotels, the scouts would get together in the hotel room and they would have cocktail hour and get together. Sometimes they'd have their wives with them, sometimes they wouldn't. And that was always fun. These scouts were always colorful characters. I really, really liked them. And they all liked each other. There was a lot of good camaraderie and stuff like that. And I think that was something with Dad, like the last 10 years we was scouting, a lot of that stuff was gone. And maybe it was just part of getting older, but he thought, it's kind of like the change in the way scouting was or whatever it was. I feel fortunate that I was in kind of that sweet spot when I was traveling with him, this camaraderie with the scouts. You get out like the cocktail nuts, and then like, he probably didn't have the bourbon in the actual container. It was probably like in a pickle jar or something like that, and they'd make cocktails. And I thought it was just and it was so cool. It was so grown up to do that type of thing. And then and they would casually talk about ball players, stuff like that. It was mostly just social conversation. But then you'd say, oh, did you see this guy? Yeah, I saw him. Over in this place. I'm going to be going over there. And they just kind of work it in and work it out. They liked talking about their work, but they weren't like overdone about it. And none of them were, Dad didn't suffer fools gladly. You didn't like braggarts or anything like that. So I've never been anything like that. Nobody in our family is. And none of these guys really were, because he probably didn't want to be around if they were, but the guys that I met, they weren't like that. They were usually pretty moderate, low-key, but you know, joyful people, colorful people. And so it's kind of cool. When I'd ride with Dad on trips, you know, we'd take the big cruiser, right? He'd have like this big Pontiac or these other cars or whatever. They were big cars, bench seats, big V8s, good air conditioning, climate control is what it would say on there. And I'd sit in the front seat with them, and we'd have the ashtray out, and we'd be eating sunflower seeds. Yeah, like, I just marveled at it first with Dad, because he could put a bunch of sunflower seeds in his mouth, and then he could shell them with his teeth one at a time, eat them, and then put the shells, you know, nasty things, into the ashtray, right? So you had all these shells, you know, sitting there. And here I was, you know, working on one, just like, okay, I finally got it down, you know, and kind of work up a little bit. But the other thing too is we'd listen to the radio, because we have an AM FM radio, and you usually have an AM, and we'd be listening to a ball game on the radio while we're going along on the interstate, eating sunflower seeds. It's a funny life. And then the other thing too that Dad loved, and I know this is something the three of us should talk about, but I got to bring it up, because the other thing besides what was on the ashtray was what was on the dashboard, and that would be like a stemudent that was drying up there.
So explain what that is.
Yeah, so we go eat, and then a stemudent is like a glorified toothpick. And so you know, toothpicks are really sharp wooden things, and this is wooden too, but it's a little softer. It's wedge shaped, okay? And you'd have a package of them. They look like a book of matches. That's what they look like. And you'd peel one off with your finger. It was kind of a mahogany color or something like that, a little lighter than that. And you'd clean your teeth or whatever. And then you wouldn't throw it away. You would save it up there on the dashboard. Let it dry, and you know, sun gets all the germs off. So it was just so fun. You know, it's so unusual. I mean, who else is going to have, I've never talked to anybody else that had a life like that, you know, driving around, whatever, where you have eating sunflower seeds, drying stemudents, listen to a ball game on AM radio. That just doesn't exist anymore. Where would you go? That'd be like going out and using a CB radio throughout the country. Good luck. This was more for family trips. And this is how Dad could figure things out too. We had that big car, big trunk, because they did have big trunks. And let's say all the family or most of the family is going to go on a trip, and so he's got to pack the trunk. Well, we wouldn't just throw our stuff in the trunk. We put it all on the outside of the trunk, right on the floor, in the garage. And then Dad was this master packer. I mean, he put all the stuff in there. It was like a Rubik's Cube. It was this giant puzzle that he knew, right? And all you could put at the end in it was like a dime, and that was it. And it was packed, but you didn't dare get anything out of that thing. Like, let's say you're on the road. You waited till you got to your destination. It was amazing. I mean, I still think about it, because I don't pack like that. I don't know anybody in our family that packs like that, but Dad packed like that. It was really something. So there's something a little weird that I have to talk about, just because it kind of gamed the phone company. And that is that before I went on trips, Dad, you know, would be going to all these different places, different towns. He was a great husband, and so he would call home, and he wanted to tell Mom where he was, right? And so let's say he's staying at the Holiday Inn in Little Rock, Arkansas, or something like that. Well, back at that time, you know, no cell phones. You just had one phone in your place, or maybe two phones, but it was the same line. And by the way, you didn't buy your phone, you rented the phone from the phone company. And it was a dial phone like that. So if you ever called between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. on Monday through Friday, you would probably be divorced from the family because it cost so much. That was only when business people would call. The prices really dropped after 5, right? And then all this type of stuff. But
that was for long distance.
That was for long distance, right? For long distance, right? That was for long distance. And so you would think, okay, well, Dad's going to call back late hour, which he did, get the cheap rate, stuff like that. But there's a way you can do it for 0. Dad figured it out because, hey, you know, that's the other thing about Dad. Dad could figure things out. He had great instinct. He could find out, you know, like where your weakness was on stuff like that. For sports, you know, he would never use it personally on you, but for sports, yeah, he would use it. And that made him a great competitor. So what he would do is he would call home and he would make a collect call home. And you're thinking, oh man, collect calls cost a lot. If you made a collect call, the other person had to pick up the charge, right? So let's say you got in trouble or something like that. Well, I'll make a collect call long distance to this other number, and you did it through the operator. And the other person had to accept the charges, right? And they had to consent to accepting the charges. And if they didn't, well, the call was ended. So Dad would pick up the phone, he would call up Mom from the hotel phone, he'd call up Mom, say, yeah, I'm calling for, and he's calling our home. Said, yeah, I'm doing a collect call for Ted Abernathy. And Mom would say, quite truthfully, Ted Abernathy, he's not here. Well, he's never there because we didn't know anybody named Ted Abernathy. and so she would say, he's not here. Can I take a message? And Dad would say, well, just tell him to give me a call when he comes in. I'm staying at the Holiday Inn in Little Rock, Arkansas at this particular number. And so she knew where he was, and then the call was ended. So he figured that out. So I always thought that was pretty clever that he could do that. And what's funny is I still use that name, Ted Abernathy, for certain things.